I'm Father Michael Orsi. I'm your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which brings you the big G, Gospel of Jesus Christ, and the little g, all the good things that people do in order to put that gospel of life into action. Today, we have a program that I kind of promised you we might do a few weeks ago. You might recall we had guests on here from an organization called Expectant Fathers Without Voices. And in the conversation, the gentleman who was director of the organization told us about a woman that he was living with who got pregnant, and then later on, in the midst of the pregnancy, decided that even though they agreed on getting pregnant, she did not want to have the child, and she went for an abortion unbeknownst to him. When he confronted her with this, she began to taunt him. And he said the taunting was in a voice that he had never heard before, and the things that she was saying didn't sound like the same woman that he had been living with. And he said to me, you know, it was almost like she was possessed by a demon. That triggered in my mind another incident. Not too many years ago, I was prayerfully protesting outside of an abortion clinic, Planned Parenthood, as a matter of fact, and we were saying the rosary. And one of the, in quotes, escorts began to mimic our prayer, and all I could say is she sounded like a witch. I heard evil, and all of us kind of got the chills up our spines. It was something that was really not of this world. I told you during that program I would try to have someone on who could talk to us about the demonic and how the demonic wreaks havoc in our world, and perhaps, you know, is working on the side of abortionists and clouding the minds of women who have abortions, and is present in the abortion clinics and in the escort and those people involved in that horrendous industry. Well, I kept my promise. Today we have an outstanding guest. As a matter of fact, I couldn't get anybody better for this topic in the whole world. His name is Dr. Richard Gallagher. He is a psychiatrist, and he has written a book called Demonic Foes. 25 years, he claims, that he has been investigating possession, diabolic attacks, and the paranormal. He is a Renaissance man. He is a student, graduate of Princeton, Yale, has a background in classical languages. He played professional basketball in Europe. He is a professor of clinical psychiatry at New York Medical College, and also he serves on the faculty of St. Joseph's Seminary in Dunwoody, New York. Doctor, I could go on and say so many more things about you, but I'm going to let you speak for yourself. Doctor, thank you for being with us. I just want to know, how did you get involved with exorcisms?
Well, thank you for your introduction, Father. It's nice to be on the show here. I tell people that everything I did, I was asked to do. Maybe I think, therefore, it's more providential that I didn't go out and sort of seek notoriety in this field or anything. So about 28 years ago or so, there was a fairly prominent exorcist in America. He was an official exorcist. I don't mention his name, although in the book I use a few pseudonyms. Everything else in the book is scrupulously accurate. But this exorcist, at a time when there were very few in America, there are many, many more now. There's probably about 100 now. In those days, there were very few. And he and a colleague of his used to travel all around the country doing exorcisms and doing evaluations. And I was at Cornell Medical College at the time, and he strolled into my office and said, "Dr. Gallagher, I'd like to ask if you're willing to evaluate some people that we think have demonic problems." I just finished my residency at Yale, and I was a little skeptical that I would see a case like this, not a disbeliever, because I was a practicing Catholic and I knew the Gospels. But I did think they were so rare that I would never see such a thing in my life. Well, I was disabused of that notion over the next several years, because he did send me some very remarkable cases.
You see, ladies and gentlemen, the doctor just said something extremely important, and it's this. He says he believed in the possibility of diabolical possession. Why? It's in the Gospels. The Gospels are truth. And so the doctor, although skeptical, I think most of us, if somebody says somebody is possessed, well, yeah, right, you just don't like the person, or they have some kind of a psychiatric problem. But doctor, tell us now, so you then get involved. This exorcist priest comes to you and he says, "Could you help us out?" And you say, "No, all right, let's see what's going on here." And then what happened?
I remember his telling me, when I said that I was a little skeptical, he said, "Well, then you're the perfect man for the job." And everything I've later done, including seeing a lot of cases, but also being the scientific advisor for the International Association, teaching a course in this subject at St. Joseph Seminary, eventually writing a book, they were all requests. So this exorcist priest, I'm going to call him Father Jacques, that's not his real name, he asked me to evaluate a couple of cases, and I started to see at least a few of them that I was fairly convinced early on were possessed. About a year later, I think, is when I had my real baptism into the field, so to speak, because I saw a incredibly remarkable, flamboyant case of a woman who was a high priestess in a satanic cult. And I had also been aware as a psychiatrist that people can imagine they're possessed. People can even have memories of being in cults that turn out to be either delusional or somehow fabrication.
So you did, doctor, you did a scientific investigation before you came to any conclusion that this is a case of possession. And ladies and gentlemen, that's very important for you to know. The church makes sure that there are no medical reasons for this, that there's maybe some other psychoses involved here. So the doctor had to do his due diligence and make sure that this is not just a case of mental illness, but this is a case of possession. So how did you determine that?
Well, I would do a standard psychiatric evaluation, and I would be looking for if the person thought that they were possessed or demonically attacked. And of course, there's other attacks other than possession, which we usually call in America oppression. But I would do standard mental status exams, occasionally labs, and even X-rays if needed. A lot of times that's not needed. And then I would tell the priest, well, this person does not seem to have a mental illness or a medical illness, which sometimes can also be confused. And he would make the official diagnosis, but I rapidly became fairly convinced that I was seeing genuine cases of possession and oppression.
Okay, doctor, you mentioned two things. There's going to be a third one that we'll get to later on. You mentioned possession and oppression, and later I want you to talk about infestation. But could you tell the folks the difference between the two?
Well, the long and the short of it is possession involves the clear takeover of the body and you might say the mind or the brain by an evil spirit. They cannot take over the soul, but they can so take over the consciousness in a bodily way that they can manifest themselves while the individual is in a trance. There's a lot of different varieties. There are people who are possessed who are aware of what's going on. But in the more classic involuntary cases, the person will go into a trance and under the pressure sometimes of the exorcism or otherwise, an evil spirit will speak. And there'll be some dramatic features. Modern people often call them paranormal features that are clearly beyond human ability to demonstrate.
Okay, Doctor, you're talking about these paranormal events that are now taking place. Before we get to that, you have made your scientific evaluation of the case. I'm sure you consulted with colleagues, perhaps other people, so just verify that this is indeed what I find here. And then you go to Father Jacques, and you say to him, "It seems like we do have a case here." And then, does Father Jacques then have to go to the bishop and ask for permission to go on with the exorcism?
Normally, yes, the exorcist will go to the bishop and get permission. That's the normal procedure. A few priests have authorization on their own from the bishop, and then they're sort of free to do it because the bishop trusts their judgment.
Okay, then you
that is probably the exception.
Okay.
More often, the exorcist will write up the case, present it to the bishop or the bishop's delegate, and then get permission.
Okay. Then you set up, I guess, with the exorcist, a time for and place for the exorcism, correct?
Correct.
And you're there?
Sometimes I'm there. I mean, I don't have to be. Sometimes I'm there as an observer.
Okay. And who's there? Who's there besides the exorcist?
Well, often the exorcist himself will have a second priest with him, often, not always, and usually a bunch of people assisting. You need people, for instance, to hold the individual down during the possession. Ideally, they like to have a health professional, at least in America, they like to have a health professional there too. So I'm often invited. I'm sure I've been to over 100 exorcisms, but as a busy professional, I can't go to them all. So the priest will often try to find somebody else, and it may be a psychiatric nurse or something like that, just to make sure that everything is kept safe.
Let me tell you, ladies and gentlemen, I have a little bit of experience with this. I was kind of surprised into it. A number of years ago, I was invited by a priest in Rome to attend an exorcism. And the exorcism took place in a small church outside of Rome, in a little side room, almost like a sacristy, about 6 o'clock in the morning. And it was Father Amroth, as a matter of fact. He was the exorcist of the Diocese of Rome. He passed away not too long ago. But I thought I was just going there as an observer. When I went there, the room was filled, I'd say maybe about 15 people, and Father Amroth. And I was sitting down, and well, there were two cases, but one that I was both cases I was directly involved with, insofar as Father Amroth asked me to hold these people down. They were practically jumping off the table. And there was one woman, she was not a very big woman at all, but she gave me quite a fight. And I was younger and stronger at that time, but it wasn't the most pleasant experience in my life. So I have a lot of respect for those people that get involved with exorcisms. So, Doctor, having said that, I kind of know what you're talking about. But what I want to ask you now is, when the exorcism is in progress, what are some of the things that are manifested through the person who is being exorcised?
The typical activity is that the person goes into a trance, especially under the commands of the exorcism. But usually there has been a demonstration of these behaviors prior. But during the exorcism, you often see it more dramatically. And the church has sort of identified a few what are called classic signs. This is in the manual, The Roman Ritual. And that includes the ability to speak foreign languages that the person couldn't know otherwise, what we call superhuman strength, which I think you experienced during the exorcism you talked about.
Yes.
It's quite remarkable, and I can give examples of all these. And then they're also in possession of what we call latra, from the Latin hidden knowledge. They seem to know things that they couldn't know otherwise. And in the more dramatic cases, you will sometimes see all three of those things. And you will sometimes see it prior to the exorcism when the person spontaneously goes into a trance. Now, what unites those things? Well, obviously, you're dealing with powers or abilities that are simply beyond human capacity. So you know then that you're dealing with some kind of foreign entity. And that person, that entity, who we, of course, as Catholics believe correctly, are evil spirits or demons.
Could I ask you, Doctor, one other thing?
Will often speak and talk in hateful ways about religion.
Yeah, I want to talk about that. But one of the signs that you mentioned in your book was levitation. A person is able to rise. And when I was holding that woman down, it seemed like she could rise on her own power, except we were holding her down. Father Amroth said, hold her, hold her, hold her. And he spoke in Italian. Tell us about the levitation. Have you witnessed that?
I have not witnessed it personally. And again, I've always emphasized, as you yourself acknowledged, possessions are rare, and within possessions, levitation is rare. But I've talked to about 30 people who have witnessed it. And sometimes, despite the best efforts of people to hold this individual down, the person rises in the air. I spoke to a woman, the wife of a former gangster who was possessed, and she, for instance, told me that she saw her husband in the bedroom rise out of the bed like that. So it's a real phenomena, but even within possessed individuals, it's even more rare than the entity itself of possession.
Now, Doc, we began the discussion before I questioned you about levitation, about the demons. Now we know the root and source, of course, is Satan himself, but obviously he has minions or assistant demons, if you will. Can you talk about that a little bit? And then how does a demon, and why does a demon enter a certain person?
Well, as you know from theology, Father, demons appear to be other fallen angels who then remain under the authority of, I use the word devil for Satan himself. So the demons are under his authority, and they also seem to take pleasure and are motivated, like Satan, to attack human beings. Now, why they do that? Well, they seem to get some kind of pleasure out of it. They're also under authority. It's an indirect way of attacking the image of God in us and God's creatures.
You hear that, folks? I read this in the book, and I was so fascinated by it because the doctor mentions in his book, why? Why? Because why? We're made in God's image and in God's likeness, and there's no greater pleasure that Satan can have than to destroy the image and likeness of God. So you can see, this is all connected. This is not something that's just simply way out there. No, it's for real, and it's something that's biblically rooted right from the very beginning, with the devil tempting Adam and Eve to try to ruin God's creation. The high point, of course, being a man himself. Doctor, why those certain people? What happens? Why, not everybody?
No, there's pretty much always a reason, Father, and it's usually because the individual, and I say this usually, there are a few exceptions, but it's usually because the individual has turned to something occult, something not necessarily full devil worshiper, although there are people like that, but has turned to something that is unsavory of an occult nature, turn to psychics, turn to shamans, et cetera, or they have turned to evil in a serious way. And that seems to invite the demon in some ways.
So in other words, they would turn to Satan and say, Satan, I want to be your child, or Satan, I need a favor from you, like Mephistopheles.
That's the most dramatic example, but it's not always so clear cut as that. Some people turn to evil of different sorts. Some people turn to occult practitioners of different sorts in a serious way.
Explain to us an occult.
Without truly, Father, understanding what they're getting into.
Okay, but explain to our folks an occult practitioner. Give us some examples. What's that?
Well, there are a lot of varieties throughout history of people who have practiced occults. I mean, you can see things like people who divinate, people who conjure up spirits, mediums, psychics, that sort of thing.
This is the story of Samuel in the Bible. Saul says,
they're all in the Bible,
conjure up.
they're all condemned.
Yeah.
They're all condemned in the strongest term because it's kind of a rival religion. And it's based on demonic forces, although the person themselves may not even know that. So you're turning kind of to an alternate belief system, to, let's say, orthodoxy. And the evil spirits then feel they're sort of entitled, that you've invited them in and they're entitled to your allegiance because they're trying to help you in some way. And then they don't want to let go. And in the worst cases, you asked before about the different varieties.
Yes.
There are people who have lesser attacks, which people use different terms. In America, we tend to call oppressions. And these are people who are harassed, attacked in some way by evil spirits without being possessed. Now, normally, or more commonly, people who have turned to occultism or evil and sinful practices. Often the two go together, but not always. They'll have opened themselves up to oppression. The worst cases open themselves up to possession.
As you can imagine, producing this wonderful program, Action for Life, it costs a great deal of money. We're going to need your help. So if you would like to donate to keep this good news program on the air, please go to your computer, your cell phone, actionforlife.net. Our thought for the day: I hope that all of you have Bibles in your home. The Bible is the Word of God, and there's nothing more powerful than God's Word. Keep it in a prominent place to remind you that you are part of God's good news and that God is using you to do His will. Okay, Doctor, wanted to know, you talked about these practitioners of the occult. Now, ladies and gentlemen, some of you might know that I'm the chaplain also at St. John Newman High School. And I talked to the kids not too long ago about being careful not to get involved in the occult. And I mentioned to the kids, I said, stay away from Ouija boards, stay away from fortune tellers, things like that that can leave an opening for the evil one to come into their lives. So, Doctor, do you find that people that get involved with the Ouija boards, they get involved with seances and fortune tellers, they make themselves susceptible? Is that correct?
Yeah, to have something really bad happen to them, like an oppression and certainly a possession, they probably have to be fairly seriously involved in that. Or more rarely, they may allow themselves in some ways to be susceptible to a curse or something. A lot of Americans don't believe in curses. The Italians are big on that.
Oh, I've laid a lot of them on.
Well, there's a lot of exaggeration and superstition about that stuff, too.
Yeah, we've heard the Italians he's talking about, one of them is La Malocchi, the evil eye, giving the evil eye.
Right.
Some of the old Italian people some still do, believe that somebody put the evil eye on us. Part of a concept of curse. Is there something to that, Doctor?
There's something to it, although it can be exaggerated.
Uh-huh.
In other words, often a curse works with a person who's made themselves vulnerable in some way, so that a really spiritually strong person is likely to have the spiritual armor to be able to resist that.
Mm-hmm.
Another person who maybe has opened the door in some other way to sinful behavior, say, or not practicing their religion, is going to be a little more vulnerable.
We would like to thank our generous sponsors for their wonderful support. Thanks for watching. Please join us next time for Action for Life. I'm for action, and I hope you are too. I'm Father Michael Orsi. I am your host for Action for Life Television, that good news program which talks about the gospel of Jesus Christ, the big G, and the little g, all the good things that people are doing to put the gospel of life into action. So please join us for the next episode of Action for Life.